Can you guys hear me at the back? Yeah. I just realized I don't have a clicker, so I'm going to have to come back to my computer to change the slide. So of course, peacocks are way cool because of their amazing trains. So this is video that I took with a high-speed camera. It was a GoPro, so not that hard to get, but that slowed down to 1/8 the actual speed. And it's not actually their tail. So that's why I'm going to call it the train. But they're also cool because of what they do with it, which you can see here. And then you can see the tail, the actual tail, is what's holding up, pushing up that train. And so here's a view of the same behavior from the front. Really amazing. So there's between usually 150 to 160 of these absolutely mesmerizing eye spots in the whole train. Okay, so only males grow the train ornament. Females, which you see at the bottom of that slide, look totally different. And they're referred to as peahens. So you wouldn't say that this is 2 peacocks. It's 1 peacock and 1 peahen. And the males grow a new train every year, and it takes about 6 months. So basically, this time of year, they're starting to shed their 2015 train, and then within a couple of months, they're going to start growing the 2016 train. And so this is a picture of a male in October, what that looks like when the feathers are all still really short, and it takes months for it to grow to that full length of about 1.5 meters. So fully grown, the train weighs about 300 grams, or 2/3 of a pound, and that's about 7% of the male's body weight. So it's pretty big. And there's about 250 feathers in total. And it's not all the eye spot feathers. There's actually 4 different types of feathers that make up the train. These ones that look like fishtails sort of rim the outer edge, and then there's some other specialized ones along the bottom edge there. So they can fly, and in fact they fly every day because they spend the night in trees usually. So the birds will fly up to their roost at night and down again in the morning. And so in this picture you can see a couple of males still roosting. I think that's another one over there just to the right of the tail. But they're not very good flyers. And so they kind of only do it when they have to. This is sped up, so this is just a male taking his time just to fly down from that roof. He's not very confident. So they're not flying long distances. Okay, so one of the reasons this train is so incredible, apart from the fact that it looks so beautiful, is that it must make it easier for predators to find and capture these animals. So of course, being green and blue doesn't really help with camouflage when you're in the wild. Plus, it's harder to get away from a tiger if you're carrying something around that weighs 300 grams. And the other thing is, when the males are displaying, they can't see what's going on behind them, so it's really easy to catch them when they're in the middle of a display. And in fact, when I was studying them, that's how I caught almost all of the males. You just sneak up behind them. So compare that male to this female. She's got good camouflage and they're trained to look around. So if bright colors and long tails make it harder to survive, how could these remarkable feathers have evolved? So remember, natural selection is supposed to favor traits that help an animal survive. Kind of like these snow hares, where they have one coat color in the winter and an entirely different coat color in the summer, in a way that helps camouflage them in their Arctic habitat. The peacock feathers seem like a paradox when you think about adaptation. And so this problem caused a famous scientist to write this. He wrote, "The sight of a feather in a peacock's tail, whenever I gaze at it, makes me sick." Can anybody guess who said that? was Charles Darwin. So he wrote this in a letter to one of his botanist friends in the USA. And he was complaining about how peacock feathers didn't seem to fit with his theory of evolution by natural selection, and that was really a problem for him. But actually, after thinking about this for many years, he came up with a theory that solved this problem. And this was really his second most important contribution. And he wrote a book about it, and it came out about 12 years after his book on natural selection. And he was actually named Man of the Day in Vanity Fair magazine the year that that book came out. So back then, scientists were in Vanity Fair. So his big idea in that book was called sexual selection. And this is a theory that explains the evolution of extravagant traits like the peacock's train. And it goes something like this. So if you imagine a population, so these are the males, and these ones without the trains are the females. If there's something different about some males, like that male over on the top right, that makes him especially attractive to females, so maybe he's got a color that happens to be a color that the females like, or a nice combination of colors, or maybe, like in this example, he has a bigger train. And for whatever reason, females prefer that. That will make females more likely to choose that male as a mate. And those males will leave more offspring, and their traits will get passed on to the offspring. And so the next generation, you'll see a change in the population where there's more males with whatever it is that these females are into. So the idea is just that extravagant traits can evolve just because they look attractive to the opposite sex. So it's really peahens that are responsible for the evolution of the peacock's train. So that's pretty incredible. So peafowl have an interesting mating system that it looks consistent with this idea. What ends up happening is the males will come to the same spot day after day, and they'll do this. They'll raise their trains and display. And the females will come around and visit many different males, often over a period of several days. And they'll check out all these different males before mating with just one. So it seems to be that they're very picky about which male they mate with. This is a map of what's called a peacock lek in a national park in India. And so a lek is just a special word that refers to this type of mating system, and it just refers to the area where the males gather to display. And so each dot along the river there is a different male's display court. So they're all along the banks of that river. Now India is the peafowl native range. And you can see that here. This is a map from the birding website ebird.org where birders log their sightings. So you can see there's lots of sightings of peafowl in India. But
what's the difference between the red and the blue?
I think the red it's probably the recency of the observation. So you can, anyone can go on this website and look up any bird species, and you can just limit it to, where have people seen peacocks in the last week? Where have they seen them in the last year? Or look at the differences between seasons and things like that. I think that's what it is. So another reason the peacocks are so cool is that they seem to thrive anywhere they've been introduced. So, for example, in California, there's a huge population of birds that came about because people released a bunch of them in the 1800s, and they've just been thriving there ever since. And there are a couple of other places in the U.S., Hawaii and Florida, where there are also lots of peafowl. So I studied them in California, Arcadia, California. And a fun fact is that in Arcadia, peacocks actually, the law says that peacocks have right of way to cross the street or any driveway. So it really is a city of peafowl. This is a map of the male display courts in one of the leks there.
Are they territorial?
Yeah, absolutely. So they will be aggressive towards another male, like in that first video I showed you. If another male comes into their area during the breeding season, that's what will happen. And I put leg bands on the birds that I studied, and then came back the next year and the next year, and a male will use the exact same court year after year. So there's very little change, except if a male dies or maybe if he loses a battle to a new male or something like that. So if you make the diameter of these circles proportional to the male's mating success, you can see that in 2008, 3 of the males mated a lot. 3 others mated a few times, and all of the little tiny circles, those are males that never mated. So they never mated, even though they spent all those months growing that long train. And then let's see what happened in 2009. Some changes, but still a small number of males are doing most of the mating. And again the following year. So some males are not mating 3 years in a row, even though they spend about 80% of their daytime hours on their display cords. So just to put some numbers on that, I pooled information from several different studies of populations in North America and in Europe. And there were over 100 different males observed. And of those males, half were never observed to mate in the year they were studied, whereas only 5% were seen mating a lot, 10 times or more in 1 year. So some of them are really successful, and a lot of them are not successful at all. Now, when you watch them displaying, a lot of the time, the females don't look too interested. And actually, scientists have quantified this. So this is not work that I did, but Jessica Yorzinski, a scientist at Duke University, she developed an eye tracker for peahens to see where they look during the male displays. And she showed that they spend an awful lot of time looking at the environment when the males are displaying, so not looking right at the male. And even when they do look at the males, it turns out that they mostly look at the bottom of their train and their feet. So it's kind of like the males putting so much energy into growing this big thing, but the females barely even look at it. Okay, so for the rest of my talk, I'm going to focus on telling you what a peacock can do to get a female's attention and what he can do to be successful, because that was the focus of my PhD research. So what makes some males so much more successful than others? Okay, so one thing we've learned is that color is really important. In a couple of the populations I studied, I captured the males before the breeding season, and I just removed a couple of feathers from each male. This doesn't hurt them. It's like getting a haircut or getting your nails trimmed. And then I took those feathers back to the lab and measured the color of the feathers. And we looked at the correlation between those colors and how much the males mated. And it turns out that this dark blue color in the middle is not at all related to mating success. So there's really no difference between the successful males and the not successful males in terms of that blue color. And the same applies to the bronze color. But what we were surprised to find was that the blue-green color in the middle there was incredibly important. So over half of the variation in mating success could be attributed to variation between males in that blue-green color. And to be exact, it wasn't simply the color, it was actually the iridescence of that blue-green. So it was the amount of the blue-green changed with the changing light angle, which you can kind of see here. Just the way the colors change depending on how the light hits them. So the most successful males had the most iridescent blue-green. Okay, so then the next thing I did was a small experiment to test the importance of color. So we used stickers to mask out the blue-green and the dark blue part of the eye spots. And so we created a bunch of males with white spots. And we also made some with black. And then we observed them over the breeding season. And these are the results. So on the y-axis here, we've got the rate at which they mated, so how many matings per hour. And you can see that the males that we didn't put stickers on, some of them never mated, but some of them did mate a fair amount. But with the stickered males, almost all of them never mated. So, and this was true even though they could still display, and they still spent just as much time as the other males on their display courts trying to attract females. The first point, how to be successful, is be iridescent as possible. Now, being iridescent isn't just about what you have, what colors you have in your feathers, because as you saw before, the light affects how those colors look. So my second point for how to be successful is to put yourself in the best possible light. So another thing that we found was that the males don't display at just any random orientation. On average, they just orient their displays at about 43 degrees to the sun. And so that cartoon there is just supposed to be as though you were looking at a peacock displaying from above. And he's got a 43-degree orientation between the angle of the sun and where his head is pointing. So it's not that every display is exactly 43 degrees. There's a lot of variation. And so this, this is still looking down from above. And those gray arrows, each one of those is the average for an individual male. And then the red arrow is the average across the whole population. So some males are closer to 43-degree orientation than others. There's lots of variation. It turns out that the 45-degree angle to the sun increases the contrast between the colors of the eye spots. So my guess is that by displaying this way, the males are enhancing the iridescence of that blue-green, which is what females seem to prefer. So you can kind of see the iridescence in action in this video. So as the male turns into the sun, those colors really pop. So it's not just about what you've got, but also how you use it. Okay, so my third point is to practice. And peacocks will start practicing their train displays when they're really young. So this video is going to show a mother with chicks that are about 5 months old. The light brown feathers that you see are those are the same feathers that get elongated into the train. She certainly has a tail. But yeah, so I wouldn't call it a train.
But she's got, she's showing her offspring how to do it.
That's what I think this video looks like. I've never studied this behavior, but it really looks like she's demonstrating.
She doesn't have a train per se.
Yeah. Now the females will also do that behavior in other situations. I think they use it as an aggressive display as well. Okay, so one more thing that we've learned from our research is that a successful peacock uses any trick he can to get attention. And so I'm going to give you some background by showing you a video of a certain call that the birds use. Okay, so that was a mating, and that sound that the male made was this noisy sound that males make whenever they attempt to mate with a female, and it's called the hoot call. So here's another video that's a lot more typical. Most of the time, the males are represented. And you can hear at the beginning of that video another hoot happening somewhere else. I don't know if you guys heard it. So when you're on a peacock flock, and especially when you're a researcher who really wants to see matings, when you hear these calls, you get excited because you think, oh, somewhere there's a female checking out a male. I better go to where the action is. It turns out that other females are more likely to come around when they hear that call. And so we found through our observations of many hours of peafowl behavior that there was a slight increase in the probability that a female would come by after a male used the hoot call. And so this might make sense. If you're a female, you probably want to go and check out males that other females are checking out because he might be one of the more attractive ones. And so we also noticed that some males would give the hoot call in a way that sounded exactly the same, but it looked a lot different. So that's so we call these the solo hoots, and the males will only do this when there's no other females in sight. And so what's going on? Well, we think we're using this, they're using this call to deceptively attract females. And what I think is really interesting about this is that not all of the males will do it. There's only, it happens in every population I've observed, but only a handful of males in any population seem to have figured out how to do this. Okay, so this is the last thing that I've got in my presentation before we can get to questions and other things. And this is, I think, my favorite thing that I've ever seen in my many hours of watching them. So you're going to see juvenile males. So they're males, but they don't have the full train because they don't grow a full train until they're about 4 years old. So these males are probably 2 or 3 years old. But they still do a lot of displaying. So it's probably good practice. And what I was doing was I was throwing some peanuts onto the ground to feed the females, just to keep the females nearby. So watch what one of these juvenile males does. He picks up a peanut. Holding that peanut in his mouth. So instead of eating it, he used it to get the female to stay nearby. I think that's so incredible. It's like he figured out how to get a female's attention in some other way. It's the only time I've ever seen anything like that. Yeah, so that's all I have.